Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil, and I won't be the only board game doctor on the video today. Joining me is longtime friend, acquaintance, and fellow doctor, Jacob. How are you doing today, Jacob?
I'm doing great, thank you. I'm very happy to be back. Tried recording some episodes on my own, had some technical issues, so it's great to actually have someone to talk to this time.
It is, and we actually had a discussion last week about the games, or at least one of the games that we're going to talk about today, and it just felt so organic having someone else to talk about games with rather than just shooting the breeze on my own. Yeah. So I get it. It is nice to get those thoughts out, but I feel like it feels much better when you have someone else to talk to about these games with. So in this video, we're going to talk about two games. These games are Voyages and Waypoints. I believe both of these games are by Matthew Dunstan. Is that correct?
Yeah, both Matthew Dunstan.
Perfect. And they are produced and published by Postmark Games. So these games are really interesting. Jacob was telling me more about them last week. And actually before, when we recorded our end of year podcast last year, we were talking about these games that are very much accessible. They are games that you can buy online. They're print and play games that cost like €5 each or something like that, or $5, the equivalent of wherever they're being produced. And you print off the PDF. You can play it in person, pen and paper, or you can also do it online. For example, I played our game of Voyages on Tabletop Simulator, for example. And so it's a print and play, kind of a roll and write type of game, but there is definitely a lot more to it, which we will flesh out in this episode. So let's go ahead and start by talking about Voyages, the game that we have just played that is freshest in our mind. Jacob, do you want to, actually, before we get into it, this was the first game that was produced by Postmark?
That's correct, yeah. At least their first kind of well-known print and play game, yeah.
So, yeah, Voyages was the first game that they produced. So, Jacob, do you want to tell us more about how Voyages plays? Maybe, give us some, like, one or two highlights of the mechanisms of how this game plays to just kind of give us an idea, a bigger overview of what this game is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a print and play game, as Phil mentioned, and it's a roll and write, as many of these games tend to be. You roll 3 dice. It's very simple. One determines... so I should also mention, you are sailing around a board, kind of similar if you've played Guild of Merchant Explorers, where you have a map where you're trying to get to the far reaches of the board, explore certain parts of the map to get points. And so you roll 3 dice. 1 die determines your direction. 1 die determines how far in that direction you move. And the 3rd die you use is for kind of like a little bingo cross-off grid puzzle in the corner. And you're balancing these actions, choosing which dice to use for which part of the game, to pick up resources, to visit the corners of the map, to get legendary stars and become like a legendary sailor, right? So you're incentivized and pulled in different directions, trying to use those dice as efficiently as possible, so that you can get the most points, right? And the game ends as soon as one of the players gets their 3rd legendary star. So there's a little bit of a race element as well, where you're racing the other player to get that 3rd star before they can get more points than you. So has a little bit of map exploration, a little bit of kind of resource collection, and a little bit of a race component as well.
Totally. Yeah, and it's all revolving around the puzzle that you're trying to solve by rolling 3 dice. And of course, there, like you said, there is mitigation to these dice rolls, but I think the crux of the puzzle does come from which dice you allocate to what direction you go, how far you go, and how else to that 3rd dice to integrate with the separate, more traditional roll and write type of experience that you're having off the map of the board. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so first of all, I guess we can go into some game comparisons too as we go along. The main comparison that I want to make with this game is with Waypoints, which is, I believe, their 3rd game along this line. Yeah. And so setting that aside, he did mention one game that I thought of when we played Voyage, which was the Guild of Merchant Explorers, right? And I think there's a lot of DNA that is seen in both this game, the Guild of Merchant Explorers, as well as Waypoints as well, where the map is seemingly, very, it doesn't seem very expansive when you look at it at first. It seems like, okay, well, this map fits on, a piece of paper. It's not a centralized board that you're trying to traverse. And so size-wise, it doesn't seem like it's that expansive, or, there's not a lot of potential to explore it. But then once you start to understand the mechanisms behind, okay, and the restrictions behind, okay, I can use this combination of dice in a certain way, therefore allowing me only these few options, then you see how, one, restrictive the map is, and two, how sometimes you do roll high, you roll your 5s and your 6s, and are able to traverse the map quite, in quite the manner that you weren't expecting to. Whether that's for good or bad, that is left to be determined by which direction you go, but I was, like the Guild of Merchant Explorers, and as we will talk about Waypoints, very pleasantly surprised about how much of that exploratory feeling I got from playing Voyages, and being able to go to different nooks and corners of the map and feel like I'm really sailing a ship, and sailing the ocean, the open seas, and going to parts that are uncharted. I got that feeling as I was playing this game. I don't know how you felt.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we were talking after we finished our game. I visited almost all of the ocean areas. I visited a lot of the islands and barely did anything with goods. Whereas you were focusing more on goods. You focused on beating the big bad pirate, right? And so we accomplished very different things using the same die rolls. And so I'm really just interested in the way that you use these dice. Two players' boards are going to look totally different, and you're going to be pulled toward different parts of the puzzle and different parts of the game to try and score. So I don't know if I would call it a point salad necessarily, right? But I love these games where you're exploring a map and getting things, right? So the puzzle is a spatial one as well as kind of a point-based puzzle, right? You're trying to maximize points, but in order to do that, you have to allocate your dice rolls to move to the right places on the map. So I definitely get that sense of exploration, right? It's like, I'm going to these islands, I have to stop at the just perfect place to pick up that sailor and to pick up these cargo and to go sell them at a different island, right? So I think the fact that the scoring in the puzzle is tied to that map structure, I think really gives me that sense of exploration, where it feels like I've really accomplished something when I land on that perfect spot.
Exactly. And I feel like that also ties in the theme of you sailing, because I feel like the theme is more of like the sailing of the ships in the 1700s, where you're very reliant on the wind and the weather to take you to where you need to go. A couple of extra mechanisms here in regards to how it works. As far as the dice mitigation goes, you have sailors that you start the game with and that you can collect by visiting certain parts of the map, and so you can accumulate your crew. But if you do want to add or take away from your dice roll, any one of the dice that you use, you can spend a sailor to do so. Now, I don't know if that means you're throwing them overboard, or they just get too tired and have to rest, or they stop off wherever. But I like the sense and the thematic sense that you are at the whims of the wind, as I imagine it. Of course, there are ways to mitigate that in real life, but in this game, it's like you're at the mercy of the dice rolls. You can spend the extra help and the extra sailors to be able to move exactly where you need to go, but you do lose that either to exhaustion or what have you. It's a very finite resource, and it's easy at first to be like, okay, I can mitigate here and there. And I think that's where I messed up in this game, is I used up a lot of sailors early on, and then midway through the game, when I needed to get to a certain place, like the Dread Island, which is something else that I wanted to talk about as far as how you get points in this game. I ended up just kind of floating around the island, in the sea, just kind of going to whichever way I could, not really accomplishing a lot because the die rolls were not in my favor, and I could not mitigate them because I had used up all of my sailors earlier on. There are plenty of ways to get them, not only from the map, but also from the little roll and write section in this game with the duties, where you're just crossing off boxes and hoping to fill out rows and columns. So there are lots of flexible ways to get what you need in this game, but I really like how rolling the dice and the restrictions of where you could go felt like the restrictions that you would get in real life, as I imagine it, on the open sea. So
yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about this. I'll do a blurb a little bit about the expansion that's included with this game, or the campaign expansion. But this, when I first played it, was a pretty big negative for me, actually. And this game has really grown on me with time. I've played it probably 10-ish times now. But it can feel like you're just at the whims of the dice, right? If you don't get the right directions, you don't get the right amount of wind, you'll pass just over that thing that you wanted, or you'll go too far, or you'll come just short, right? And when you're in a race against other players, right, it feels like that bad turn can really be like a kick in the shins, right? But the more I've played it, the more I've learned that that is just part of the puzzle, right? And trying to leave yourself in a position where any roll will take you to something that you want to accomplish, right? Or being flexible in your planning so that, I was planning on going south, but I guess I can just go north and start doing this thing over there instead, right? So I think it's a little bit about being flexible, but also about planning ahead so that when those winds change, you still have something you can do on your turn, right? So where initially I was the only one in the group that liked this when I first played it, because they were like, this is too restrictive. You're too reliant on the luck of the rolls. It's too restrictive. I thought it was a really interesting puzzle, and the more I've played it, the more I've kind of caught on those intricacies of how you can work with it, even though there are times when the game feels punishing and restrictive, but I think in a really good way, because it feels satisfying to work your way around those restrictions.
I agree. I would say that it's not at the same rules depth and complexity, or even strategic complexity as, say, Barrage or something like that, right? Like a heavy hero. But at the same time, I agree, because even though you are rolling dice and you're at the whims of the luck of the roll, I think there are enough ways to mitigate it, and enough ways to also kind of roll with the punches, as it were, to accomplish other things on your map, to be hopefully able to do what you were initially planning to do in a very efficient way. And that's something else that I wanted to touch on, was the flexibility of scoring in this game as well. There are, like you mentioned, there are 3 ways, or there's one way to end the game, and that's to get 3. Whoever gets 3 stars triggers the end of the game. There are no set rounds in this game. Everyone, we roll dice until someone gets their 3rd star. There are not just 3 stars to get. You have all of your goods that you can sell up to their maximum amount. So there are 4 goods you can sell. There are 4 opportunities to get stars there. If you get enough sailors accumulated onto your ship, that's a star there. If you defeat the Dread Pirate, there's a star. There's a star on the roll and write duties map, which is the rows and columns, as well as there's one on the map where you can traverse the ocean, and if you land on that spot, you can get that star as well. And so there are so many different ways on the map itself, as well as within the game, for which you can get stars. And in our game, as it happened to be, we both had, you got the 3rd star, we had 1 turn left, and by the luck of the roll, I was able to accomplish my 3rd star at that same time, which I thought was neat. It probably doesn't happen all the time, but I really liked the flexibility for where we got our stars, where we allocated our time. You obviously did it in a more efficient way. You scored like 30 more points than I did, but it's really neat that you can still, despite the restrictions, have different goals that are available to you. And despite us having the same rolls and utilizing the same dice, our trajectories really diverted early on in the game, even probably after the 2nd or 3rd dice rolls. And it's amazing to see what kind of end game we both arrived at. And so I loved the flexibility of the objectives that you were trying to achieve in this game. So
yeah, and I just wanted to throw out there that I've played a lot of roll and write games. Roll and writes are one of my favorite genres, and I don't think I've played any that are as open and flexible as in terms of scoring, in terms of spatial maneuvering, right? I mean, obviously the fact that it's a spatial puzzle allows for a little bit more roominess in how you maneuver and how you play. I don't think I've ever played roll and writes that are as open and flexible as Waypoints and Voyages. I just think they are masterclass in doing a spatial roll and write that allow you to go any number of directions in order to accomplish those goals.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like these games do so much with so little. And it's amazing. It's quite the feat that not only just one game, but they Dunstan has produced at least three of these games in a similar vein that have a similar feel. So at this point, Jacob, we've talked about the Guild of Merchant Explorers and Waypoints, which we will get to as well. There is that second Postmark game, Aquamarine, right?
Aquamarine, yep.
Yeah,
we have not played yet, but we should.
We should.
Yeah.
And so, are there any other games that this reminds you of, specifically talking about Voyages?
I'm sure there are. I think just because Matthew Dunstan is on the brain, the Gilded Merchant Explorers is the main point of comparison for me. And it just feels like a different way of implementing a similar puzzle. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think Rolling Realms, of course, is another game that is not really map-based like these games are, but have a similar feel to you rolling the dice and using those dice to allocate different resources to solving the same puzzle that's given out to everyone, but where everyone ends up doing something different, right? And so that, of course, has a lot of modularity to the puzzles that you're trying to solve from game to game that are inspired by games as well. So that's pretty neat in and of itself, but without the map component that you see in this game. The dice mitigation too. There was a game that I was thinking about. Maybe it'll come to me when we talk about Waypoints, but there was another one where mechanically it felt very similar to Voyages. That is not a roll and write, but we'll see. Anyway, as I typically
sorry.
go.
I apologize. So I was going to say, I did actually just think of one, which we talked about very briefly. It was the Wayfarer's Tale, which was the runner-up last year for the Golden Geek print and play, 2 Waypoints. It was the runner-up. Similar, and it's actually interesting. It's an invert of the puzzle, right? Where in this, you roll your dice, you allocate them, and then it's how you move around the map that allows you to get goods, sell things, get your points. In Wayfarer's Tale, it's the opposite, where you roll your dice, you have to allocate them into like a little, there's like a little grid of mini games that you're playing with your die rolls, and depending on where you go and how you activate those different little mini game realms, that determines how you move on the map, right? So it's interesting how similar it is, and it ticks a lot of the same boxes. My wife actually likes a Wayfarer's Tale better because it feels more open and flexible in how you activate those mini games to move around, whereas this is, you have to move correctly in order to get your things, right? So this is a little bit more of a tight puzzle. Wayfarer's Tale feels a little looser, a little more like a traditional roll and write, that then how you activate your realms lets you move on a separate map, right? So sorry, I just want to throw that in there because that is, I think, a very notable comparison as well.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I did think of the other game that I thought of, and it's kind of not a really direct comparison that I think many people would think about, but for some reason I thought of Can't Stop. I was thinking of the dice. In that game, you're rolling 4 dice and you're combining the sums of all of those dice to move up a track, which is the track is like the sums of each of those dice from 2 to 12, and whoever gets up to the top of the summit, as it were, with 3 of those sums wins. It's easier shown than described, but I think a lot of people are probably familiar with Can't Stop. It's a classic game from Sid Saxon, but I kind of got the similar sense of the puzzle that you're trying to solve with the dice, right? You, in Voyages, have 3 dice that you're trying to allocate into 3 different sets, right? You have your direction, your how much movement you have, and what you allocate to duties. And so you have 3 different combinations that you're working with, and you're trying to figure out which one, or not 3, 4? I don't know. And anyway, for those who know the math, you know what I'm talking about, but you have all of those different combinations that you're trying to piece together on your turn to make sure you're making the most effective move as possible. And I felt like it was very similar to the allocation and the different combinations of dice rolls that you're putting together with Can't Stop, even though with Can't Stop it's easily just adding and summing those dice versus in Voyages where it's a little bit more convoluted. But there's kind of also, maybe it's a stretch, but I also kind of felt there was a push your luck type of mechanism here in Voyages as well as in Can't Stop, because you sometimes feel like I felt like that I was committing to a certain strategy, for example, and really hoping for the dice rolls to roll in my favor on the next turn or the next few turns, because I'm so close to a certain thing or a certain island or an object that I need to land on. I have enough sailors to mitigate my dice rolls. I just need them to align near or just perfectly for that to happen. And it felt like, okay, I'm putting all of my bets, or most of them, into this one set of this one strategy, and hopefully I would get the set of rolls that I need to be able to accomplish that. And it felt very similar to Can't Stop, where as I'm rolling these dice, I'm committing to 3 different sums on my turn, and I'm hoping to continue rolling those dice and pushing my luck to get those sums and collect those sums, basically, to move up that mountain before I bust. And so it might be a stretch, but I kind of felt that sort of restriction, but yet there's flexibility to how you decide to use those dice, and I really enjoyed that about Voyages, and in a similar vein to how I enjoy Can't Stop as well.
Yeah, and this is actually maybe a good point to jump in and just have one word about the solo mode.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned, when you're playing competitively, it's a race to 3 stars. This is a common feature in postmark games that are solo mode, or actually a race against the clock. So, in the solo mode, you have a little penrose on the map, and you put a dot each time you take a turn. You only have 18 turns to get 3 stars. So I actually played through, they have their solo campaign, and I failed the first scenario 3 or 4 times, and I was like, how is this so difficult? And I realized I was trying to play as if it was competitive by trying to get the highest score possible, right? Mm-hmm. But when you're playing solo, it's a race to get those 3 stars before that 18th turn, and I kept not getting the star because I'd pushed things just a little too far, right? So speaking of that, push your luck, where the solo mode takes this really tight puzzle and then compresses it even more, because you have to play not just to maximize points, but to get those stars in a timely manner, right? So you're really narrowly focusing in on how can I get stars as efficiently as possible while also maximizing my score. And so I feel like the solo mode really squishes this even harder, right? It's like pressing that oil out of the olives. It's just pushing you to try and get you to play more efficiently, quicker, more brutally, right? I really like the solo mode in this game because it feels so tight, and that you're really trying to play efficiently. And just a quick word about the solo campaign as well. Mm-hmm. As you play, you use your stars to unlock powers, which those powers let you break the rules of the game, let you do really powerful, amazing things. But at the same time, you're facing an arch nemesis who is giving you added restrictions, who's giving you other things that you can't do. In my game, I played against Doom, who I was... these are cumulative, right? So one game you get 1 restriction, the next game you get 2 restrictions, the next game you get 3 restrictions. So he made it so I could move 1 less space per turn. Then he made it so I couldn't use sailors to change my speed. Then he made it so I could score less regions. And then at the very end of the game, this is the worst one, and it was really actually kind of funny and fun to play this game, but I had to roll 1 die before everything else, and that had to be my direction. So
oh my gosh,
by the end of the game, I couldn't change my speed, I couldn't choose my direction, and so you're just kind of throwing caution to the wind to be, pun intended, throwing caution to the wind to be like, I need to get 3 stars, even though I can't change my speed and I can't choose my direction, right? But you unlock those powers, so you're also kind of breaking the rules using special abilities to fight against just increasing pressure and increasing restrictions. So if you like a really tight solo experience, the base game solo is great and amazing, and then the campaign just adds more flair by making it even more ridiculously impossible, but then giving you kind of these rule-breaking abilities that make you feel really cool and you use them effectively. So love the solo mode in this game. It's I think it's my favorite way to play.
That's really cool, and yeah, the approach to the solo game sounds a lot different from the openness that Voyages has in the multiplayer experience. Yeah, so excellent. I love how the same system can just be derived in such a different way, providing a different approach to the game, just with a few rules tweaks from a solo to a multiplayer perspective. I think that's really neat with this game.
And I mean, as is true with other postmark games as well, you pay the one price and then you get, I think Voyages has 6 maps now, and every map has a different mini game for the duties, different ways that you actually collect things, different ways you score points, right? So not only are you playing kind of a different little puzzle with more restrictions, you're playing across different maps, and so the variety is through the roof here, and I love every single one of these maps. Some are more difficult than others, some are very punishing, and some are very open and loose, and I like that you can kind of choose your difficulty depending on what map you want to play. So love that you have expansion content built right into the base purchase as well.
That's really cool. Yeah. And so speaking of other postmark games, I think this is a good time to transition into Waypoints and talk about some of the similarities and differences of that game and our thoughts on it. So I'll go ahead and talk about Waypoints. So we played this. You taught it to me last week, so feel free to fill me in on any details that I may miss. But so as an overview in this game, you are hiking around a certain area of the world. Like I think this first map was called like the Golden Valley or something like that.
Yeah, they're national parks. Like
they're national parks. Okay.
Fake national parks. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you roll a dice. So the first mechanism is how movement and the turn structure work. So I think this is really unique to me, at least. And so you only have one dice that you're rolling, and you roll the dice. You move forward on this track, and I'll throw in a comparison here. Kind of think of like Parks or any other game that has a one direction movement track that you're on. And so I roll a 5, I move forward 5 spaces on this track, and that space that I land on tells me how many spaces I can move my character on this map around the board, right? So not only does this mechanism keep track of how far you can move, but it's also the tracker for the timing of the end of the game. You play through, you roll the dice, you randomize how many moves you're able to take, and you ultimately get to the end of a corner of a page, and so it's around the entire page of the board. You at the end of the day, you take your last turn, you stop, you rest, you get water, etc. And water in this game is how you mitigate dice rolls, and then you do it all over again. You roll your dice again, you move forward on this one-way track to see how far you move in the next turn, etc. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But the second highlight about this game is how you traverse this map. So in Voyages, back to Voyages, you are traversing a hexagonal map, and for each dice pip, you move over one hexagonal space over in whatever direction that is. In Waypoints, the map is situated in such a way, if you are familiar with like atlases or topographical maps, where different lines represent different elevations. It's a similar structure in this game where each pip that you move, or at least each point of movement that you have determined for you by your dice roll based off of this one-way track, tells you how many movement points are allocated to go through. So, for example, if I had rolled a 5, I could traverse 5 different topographical lines on the map. And this includes the grids. Like the board is separated into major grid sizes as well as the topographical lines within and traversing each of these maps. And so you can move in the same like elevation as far as you can in whichever direction you want to go. But if you are to traverse a grid point or a topographical line, you have to spend that action point. And so and then finally, the way that you score points in this game are varied. You are very similar in a similar vein to Voyages. You're going around to different icons that are located on the map. You're going to different peaks, which have different scoring opportunities there and points that you can collect. You can visit different animals that can, if you visit enough animals of the same type, they give you some special powers that you can activate during the game. You have different items that you can accumulate that help you mitigate dice rolls in addition to water. You can, for example, get a backpack, which is a wild resource that could serve as either a kayak, which lets you really traverse along a river, like up to 3 grid spaces away, etc. And so you have a lot of different icons that you're trying to move towards and trying to achieve, so you can use them for your benefit. And so, yeah, and then the game plays basically until you've gone through 4 days, and whoever has the most points wins. And point accumulation is somewhat similar to Voyages, where there are different types of objectives that you can try to pursue based off of the different icons that you're visiting and collecting, as well as where you traverse on the map. Jacob, is there anything that I missed, or any mechanisms that you'd like to highlight before we move on to other things?
I guess one thing I'll just throw out there is that in Voyages, you move a certain number of spaces in a certain direction. You stop wherever that happens to be. If you land on something, great, you get it. If you don't, too bad, right? In Waypoints, you actually have to end on a waypoint, right? So you're moving from point to point. So if you roll a low number, you have to try and figure out how to get to something while only crossing, like, say I can only move 2, I need to figure out how can I get to a point of interest while only crossing 2 lines on this map, right? And so there are several things that it's like, if I want to get to the mountaintop, I'm crossing 3 or 4 lines, and then if I want to come back off that mountaintop, I have to cross those 3 or 4 lines again, right? So um,
Right.
there's a way in which you have certain things are locked off. If they're kind of circled around, you know you're going to have to cross that line twice. But in other ways, this is actually kind of free and open and saying, okay, if I work around this way and go to this thing, I will actually only have to move 2 lines and I'll still get to a point of interest, right? There is a similar kind of cadence as Voyages, but I think in this one, the fact that you have to move to a specific point of interest changes the puzzle, right? And changes the antagonist is not just the die roll and like, oh, I ended up in the middle of the ocean, right? The antagonist is, how am I gonna be efficient in how I move across this map, right? And so thematically, you're thinking like, I really want to go see that bird, but I don't want to hike that mountain to get there, right? So
Right.
you're trying to conserve energy and hike this landscape as efficiently as possible, conserving energy as you do that.
Exactly. And so transitioning into, I guess, some comparisons and what I like about this game too. So first of all, I think the sense of exploration is here as well as it was in Voyages in a different way. Like in Voyages, and the thematic integration is just fantastic in my opinion for both of these games. But like in Voyages, you're restricted by the dice rolls, as if you were restricted by the whims of the wind and the sea. Versus in Waypoints, so thematically, when you're rolling the dice and moving along the movement track, it will stop and it will tell you what the weather is like that day, or that part of the day. So for example, the lower movement, like you can only move or traverse one point, one line, because it's snowing, right? And so the icon for like 1 movement is snow, and then for 2 and 3 it's rain, 4 and 5 is cloudy, and 6 or 5 is a sunny day, right? And so it really reflects like what you're able to accomplish based off of the weather patterns that are being depicted on this movement track. And so you're once again, like in Voyages, you're really hoping for a certain dice rolls to occur for you to get to where you want to go. Likewise, in this game, you're hoping for the right die roll to work in your favor to give you enough points to get to where you want to go. But in addition to that, the restriction is that if you do end up rolling, like with the dice itself, a 5 or a 6, you're moving along that track really quick. And so the amount of time that you have in that day is very limited. And so at the beginning of the day, the first like 1 or 2 or 3 movements, you have plenty of time to try to accomplish what you want to. But then the 4th and 5th roll, it starts to get really close to when you have to end your day. And when you do end your day, for scoring opportunities, there are campfires located throughout the map, and you want to land on those campfires by the end of the day. So like you would at nighttime, and you want to rest. If you don't, it's fine, but you miss out on some multipliers for some scoring opportunities. And so I thought that was really neat how they integrated that to, like, as you explore the wilderness, or if you're camping or something like that, you do want to try to accomplish everything that you want to do before daylight and time run out. And so that to me, like, really felt like I was out there backpacking myself. I was out in the wilderness. I have 4 days out by myself or with friends, and okay, I want to go and see this mountain, see this reserve where the animals are at, and I want to make it over here as well. But I know I have limited time and daylight to do so. And so you hope for the best opportunities and the best efficiencies possible to make it to all the little goals that you have planned for that day, to be able to, at the end of the day, score as many points as possible for the different objectives that you're trying to fulfill. I just thought that was really neat.
Yeah, and I think it's really neat that so every day you get to choose what journal objective you're going to score. So there's like kind of variable scoring, right? Every day you get to choose which thing you want to score based on how, what types of things you were visiting that day. But there's also an end game objective that differs from game to game. Like you want to visit all of the ponds or all of the forests or cross all the bridges, right? So there are also kind of substructures that change game to game that will change how you approach the same puzzle, because those objectives are slightly different, right? And also to mention that for many of these games as well, Postmark includes kind of an achievement list. So for this game, on the back, it looks like a little pamphlet for the national park, right? So you flip it over, and it has like little achievements that force you to maximize specific parts of the game, right? So it's like try and score maximum points on these goals, trying to use all of these things, trying to visit all 10 mountains, right? So you have variable scoring by the day, you have end of game scoring, and then you have achievement scoring, which really pushes you to expand to the extremes, right? And to say, I'm going to max out this part of the game, or I'm going to max out this part of the game. And I really love how variable the scoring is here, right? So I could play the same map, 4 times and have totally different experiences, and then I could play it an additional 10 times trying to get achievements, right? So I think there's just a lot of longevity coming from a simple little map here. And again, I think Postmark are a masterclass in terms of variability coming from just a piece of paper.
Exactly. And so if I were to compare this game for the points that you mentioned, like the achievements that you're trying to collect throughout the game, like from game to game, you can push yourself in a different direction and try to make that achievement, just to not only see if you can do it, but also to kind of explore how the mechanisms of the game come together to allow you to do so. And I found it very similar to not only just the thematic presence and ambiance, but also the achievement setting that you see in Cascadia. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of similar in a sense of, okay, I'm trying to pursue this objective and kind of balance different objectives one with another to be able to get the best points possible. But also I thought of this game last week, and it makes sense with Voyages as well, but Atiwa by Rosenberg has, and I've mentioned this multiple times on the channel, but the solo achievements and challenges that are offered in that game really push you to play the game in a certain way, or in a different way that is not perhaps as readily seen or surmised when you play it multiplayer. And I think a lot of people play Atiwa in the multiplayer setting and don't have that challenge mindset to try to pursue it in a different way. And so I really appreciate what Waypoints is doing with that achievement setting, like you would get with digital games as well. I think I see a lot of older games being digitized and having different objectives that you're trying to pursue, which is fun. But I love the concept of you trying to play the game in a certain way, trying to like bend it and twist it in a different way, push and pull levers to make the game have it reimagined from what you might have guessed it would play like as a multiplayer experience. And then finally, my last comparison with the Guild of Merchant Explorers. I think this game, Waypoints, feels more like the Guild of Merchant Explorers because of the sense of flexibility and exploration that you see in this game. It feels more flexible than it does in Voyages, and I feel like the Guild of Merchant Explorers is a more flexible game like Waypoints is, because in Waypoints you have all the different items that you can collect that allow you to traverse the map in a fantastic way. Like the kayaks, like I mentioned before, you can traverse 3 grid spaces, not just topographical lines, but actual grid spaces away to get to where you want to go. You have like the hang glider, which you can use to hop over from a mountain to a different grid spot adjacent. And so there are binoculars where you can cross off a certain objective, an icon on the map, by just being next to it, adjacent to that binocular, right?
Yeah.
Taking a picture of it, right? And so 2 birds with 1 stone, essentially. But it felt like the Guild of Merchant Explorers had those cards and those abilities that you acquired throughout the game, which allowed you to break the game in a whole set of different ways that felt really cool. And I felt that same awe and just power from being able to utilize these items in Waypoints to a degree where at first, just like in Voyages, I felt like the map felt bigger than it actually was, and I felt like, how am I ever going to get a high score and accomplish all that I want to do and what the game is telling me to do in a seemingly small amount of turns? But as soon as I get those items, it grows from something really small, and you're just kind of piddling along to something more grand. And so it just felt like the game opened up really well in the mid game, and by the end of it, you could see you had traversed a good chunk of the map. And whether you did that efficiently or not, that's up to repeated plays. But regardless, I felt very powerful and very accomplished at the end of Waypoints, just like I did with the Guild of Merchant Explorers.
Yeah, and I'd say in terms of comparing this with Voyages, I think it's so interesting. They really, if you explain it to someone, they'll say, "Oh, that sounds like the same game, right? You're rolling dice to determine how far
right.
you can move, and you're moving across a map to visit things, right?" But they feel so different. I think Voyages feels very tight, very restrictive, very precise. You have to be very precise in how you do things. And I think the word I'd use for, I think we talked about this last week as well, right? I think the word would be like either creative or organic, right? It feels as if you can move around the topography creatively, right? You can be creative because you're just given like action points basically. And it's like, okay, move around the map until you reach something, right? In Voyages, you're like, you will move in this direction this far, right? I feel like in Waypoints, you can be organic and creative about how you move around that landscape, right? And say, okay, I actually see this perfect path by the river that's the path of least resistance, and that'll get me all the way across the map, right? And then I can use a kayak to go around the bend of the river and then visit this bear that is in opposite corners, right? So you can really find creative ways to get farther and to be efficient. And I think in both of these games, right, you get a sense of looking back. I hear this a lot when people are like, you look at your board state at the end of a board game and say, I've built something, right? You feel satisfied. You're like, I can see that I've accomplished something, right? I love this game because it's like, I literally have my map, right? This was my journey. This is what I saw. This is where I went. And I love looking down, and it feels like it's your own pirate map or your own national parks trail map, right? You're like, that was the path I took for the park. These are the memories I made. This is what I journaled about. You look back and you really feel as if you've accomplished something. And I think for me, I just love spatial games for that reason. You can kind of see your progress, right, in linear fashion, and see kind of what choices you made where, and where you messed up, right? I love kind of the storytelling that looking back on your maps has. And I've taken a picture of a few of my games, and I can like go look and be like, wow, that was such a creative thing that I did that round, right? And at times it does feel like you're breaking the game, but I think it's I felt that multiple times playing Waypoints, and that lets me know I'm not breaking the game. It's just designed to make you feel really good, right? Feel really clever, feel really good. You feel like you're breaking the game, but you've just utilized the systems correctly, and I think that's just amazing.
It is, yeah. I feel like the precision element of the Guild of Merchant Explorers is seen more in Voyages, but the sense of power and flexibility that you get from the asymmetric powers that you acquire is very much seen in Waypoints, and I really enjoy that too. I did want to just briefly mention the track again, the one-way movement track. I thought it was just really neat because we did a quick calculation at the end of the game to see, okay, like seemingly it's random for how many turns you can take in a day, right? One quadrant of the board along the edge of the board. And I felt like it ended up being pretty balanced though. Like at first I thought, oh man, like there's one day where you can only have like 3 turns or something like that, and then another day where you're just plodding along, taking 1 and 2 actions. But the movement numbers, the action points that you get are, I don't know if they were intentionally randomized or if they were, intentionally randomized or they were intentionally placed on purpose. But I felt like I think we got between like 4 and 6 turns per day, and ending in about 20 turns during the whole game. And so knowing that perhaps the standard deviation is maybe 1 or 2 turns away from 20 or something like that, you can kind of plan ahead when you play the game again to say, okay, I know I have 20 turns to do something. I know exactly how many turns I might have per day, per round, essentially. And so therefore, I know what I can do and can't do, thus leading to more efficient play later on, not to even mention the achievements and challenges that you're trying to achieve with those same restrictions applied. And so I just thought that was a really neat way to approach how turns were taken, not only for the thematic reasons that I mentioned before, but also how they essentially built the game in this track, whether it was intentionally random or not. I just thought it was just really neat to have something that is seemingly random, but give you kind of a predicted sense of how long this game might take and how many turns you actually have in this game. So really neat. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and it kind of gives you that sense of, like in Voyages, you're waiting, like, when is that person going to get their 3rd star? Can I eke out 1 more turn, right? Like, how many more turns do I have left? And at Waypoints, it's just like, how is the weather going to treat me today? And how far can I make it with the weather? And so I kind of like, again, that little bit of theming that it's like, at the end of the day, you could just reduce this and be like, it's just dice chucking, right? It's all random. But I think if you look at it from a thematic perspective, I think it's really kind of clever and fun. That it's like, well, the weather was bad. Sorry, you only got to move 1 thing and you got cut short today, right? Like, it gives that a little bit of an ebb and flow from game to game. And I think it just makes it, again, feel a little bit more organic.
And like you mentioned too, like it tells a story.
Yeah,
like
it does.
You feel like you can tell a story after each game, which is something that I appreciate and look for in the games that I'm playing. And I am very happy to have played Waypoints and Voyages now, which are essentially, roll and write games, but even though you're only playing with this small little, map on a piece of paper and you're rolling dice and drawing on it, it does not feel like the more mathy roll and writes that are out there with lots of combos, and you're just essentially crossing off different, grids and puzzles that you have on your piece of paper. It's very much the opposite. I feel like there's so much game here and so much of a thematic like integration and submersion into what the game is trying to tell you story-wise through its mechanisms, that it does not feel like a traditional roll and write. It feels very much like a normal, or I guess traditional, like light to medium light type of board game, which I think is so excellent. So I have to say, in sum, like, I've become more and more of a fan of Dunstan and his approach to roll and writes and games in general. I've really waxed poetic about the Guild of Merchant Explorers on the channel. I've talked about Village Rails in the past. It didn't quite hit the mark for me, but playing games such as Waypoints and Voyages has just been a very uplifting experience. And so I have you to thank, Jacob, for spearheading this for me personally, and perhaps to those who watch and listen to this as well, putting this on their radar, something that's easily played through and easily accessible, for whether it's free on Tabletop Simulator or for, like $5. There's a lot more game that meets the eye when you pick up some of these games, and so it's a high recommendation from me. I don't know if you have any final thoughts before we wrap up this video.
Yeah, just really quickly. I probably have gushed a little bit too much. Maybe I'm too free with my praise on these games. I mean, they do have their limitations. It's just a piece of paper, right? So you have limitations. But I think we talked about this a little bit last week, that I think the creative constraint of having a single piece of paper and some dice really brings out some creative design decisions, right? So again, with Matthew Dunstan, I think he's done an amazing job and bringing out a really interesting set of decision space on essentially what's just a map, right? I think the limitations have really bred an interesting set of mechanics and using dice in interesting ways. So it's not just putting a number in a grid, right? As is so common with roll and write games. In terms of just bang for buck, I think this is up there with some of the best bang for buck I've ever gotten for a game, right? I paid $5 for each of these. They're living games. They have maps that keep coming out. Voyages currently has 6, Waypoints has 3, Aquamarine has 5 currently. That's all for the base price. And I think more than most games that I've played as well, these maps don't just feel like different arrangements of the same things. They have actual mechanic variation, right? So even the things you're collecting, in Waypoints, the tools and how they function and in what ways they're overpowered change. So from core rule changes to different abilities to, including achievements and solo campaign, right? These games are just... I'd probably be as brave as to say, like, these are the best value I've ever gotten in board gaming. Just
for sure,
dollars to donuts. These are so great. And for me, as someone who lives across the country from my family and always walking to school, right, I could just toss these in a small binder with a dry erase marker and a set of dice, and I'm set, right? I have 3. I have a few more in my binder, right? But just in terms of Postmark, I have 3 full games with 3 to 6 expansions in a binder, right, that I can take wherever I go. So portability, affordability, and variability are just amazing here. So I have been gushing, but I think it's with good reason, because I think these are poster child examples of what print and play board gaming can be and what roll and write games can be.
I totally agree. I think it is not without good reason that you have gushed to me and to others about these games, and I'm very pleased to have played it with you and hope to do so more in the future. So everyone, those are our thoughts, more of a review standpoint from Jacob, who has dived into these games more of a first impressions from me. Regardless, those are our thoughts on Waypoints as well as Voyages by Matthew Dunstan and Postmark Games. Let us know if you've played these games in the comments down below. But otherwise, thank you for consulting with us today, and we hope that you catch and schedule an appointment with us real soon and catch another episode with us. Take care.
Bye.